My people, gather around because we need to talk about the absolute masterclass in political warfare currently unfolding in West Africa. Remember when the mainstream corporate media was busy writing obituaries for the patriotic movement in Senegal? Well, I told you right here on Power and Pulse, while the entire continent was distracted by the noisy political banter and the standard theatrical distractions, that an intense calculated chess match was being played under the surface. Okay, the old guard political machinery desperately trying to save itself from absolute irrelevance was moving pieces behind the scenes. They weren't just engaging in standard debates, they were weaponizing the legislative architecture itself. They constructed a hyper-aggressive strategy to strip Sonko of his parliamentary status, effectively trying to pull off an institutional eviction. Let's look at the sheer desperation of the setup. The anti-patriotic establishment manipulating whatever pockets of opposition leverage they had left in the building, literally dragging this entire battle straight to the doors of the highest judicial authority, the Constitutional Council. Okay, their objective was completely transparent. They wanted to execute a flawless double-tier political knockout. First, they wanted to rip Sonko completely out of his seat as a representative of his local constituency. Second, they wanted to violently block him from ascending to the position of President of the National Assembly. They wanted to make sure that the single most formidable force for the true economic liberation in Senegal was left with zero constitutional footing, zero legislative power, and zero institutional armor. But if there is one fundamental truth that these political dinosaurs continuously fail to memorize, is this: you cannot use administrative technicalities to permanently erase a leader whose legitimacy was baptized in the fires of grassroots mass mobilization. The lawmakers of the PASTEF party didn't just show up to court to file basic paperwork. They mobilized a fierce, sophisticated, and completely unyielding defense framework that turned the establishment's own legal trap into a spectacular public humiliation for the old guard. Let's break down the exact mechanics of what went down, because this is where the story gets incredibly beautiful for anyone who values authentic national self-determination. So, recently, the highest judges of the Constitutional Council finally stepped up to the podium and delivered a definitive, historic verdict that sent shockwaves through the entire West African landscape. So, after methodically evaluating the baseline arguments from both sides, the council looked the establishment directly in the eye and threw their entire case out the window. The judiciary made it completely clear that under the absolute uncompromised letters of Senegalese law, Ousmane Sonko possesses every single moral, legal, and constitutional right to immediately reclaim his parliamentary seats. The legal logic was so beautifully simple that it completely exposed the amateur hour occurring within the anti-patriotic camp. The council reminded the nation that Sonko was explicitly chosen, verified, and voted into office by the living breath of the people of his constituency. He did not voluntarily abandon his post, nor did he ever sign away his mandate. He only stepped away from the floor temporarily to take on the massive sweeping executive responsibility of organizing the state as Prime Minister. Now that he has wrapped up that specific executive deployment and transition out of the premier position, the law states that his original legislative seat doesn't belong to the state. It doesn't belong to the opposition, and it certainly doesn't belong to the court. It belongs to him and the citizens who put him there. He has unassailable legal authority to walk right back through those doors, pick up his gavel, and lead the National Assembly. This is a massive historic victory. It is an absolute triumph for the PASTEF camp, for the defense teams who stood their ground, and for every single conscious citizen who wants to see Senegal governed by indigenous dignity rather than external design. But I am standing here today to give you a very serious, completely unwatered down a reality check. The celebratory dances need to be short, okay? The battle is nowhere near over. You need to understand the dark psychology of the globalist networks and their local puppets who are watching this unfold. They are absolutely sick to their stomachs right now. They aren't sitting at home crying. They are actively regrouping. Every single time the patriotic camp secures a definitive institutional victory, the panic within the shadow cartels intensifies tenfold. Why? Because they know Sonko isn't coming back into the legislative house just to sit quietly, collect a government paycheck and follow old colonial protocols. He is returning as an absolute locomotive of structural transformation. Just look at the absolute comedy of their panic. They have tried everything in the book over the last few years to neutralize this man. They tried throwing him into prison on entirely fabricated charges. He walked out. They tried banning his political party entirely. The party grew into an unstoppable super majority juggernaut. They tried creating internal rifts within the executive branch, and the parliament responded by electing him as Speaker of the House within an overwhelming 132 votes. Every single weapon they forge against this transformation seems to immediately blow up in their own faces. So now they are retreating into the deepest, darkest corners of administrative sabotage. They are looking for every micro loophole, every obscure clause, and every corrupt back alley method to throw sand into the gears of his collective autonomy. They recognize that if Senegal fully locks down its national dignity under this unyielding leadership, right, the entire neo-colonial domino structure across West Africa will completely collapse. This is exactly why the conscious citizens of Senegal cannot afford to become complacent or fall asleep at the wheel. The defense of these foundational figures cannot be outsourced to courts or left entirely to political security details. True protection is a collective, non-negotiable assignment. So when you have a transformative figure who is explicitly targeting the unequal fisheries agreements, demanding the audit of foreign mining concessions, and systematically dismantling the financial networks of dependency, that person automatically becomes a high-value target for the global corporate empire. They don't just want to defeat him at the ballot box. They want to structurally and psychologically break the movement he represents. We must remain hyper-vigilant because the enemies of African self-governance operate through multi-layered strategy. They deploy psychological operations via international media networks to paint authentic transformation as unhelpful instability. They manufactured economic anxieties around sovereign debt to force compromises with external financial institutions. They use administrative technicalities to continuously tie up our visionary leaders in endless legal warfare. They look for any opportunity to speak internal divisions within the patriotic ranks to dilute the collective energy of the population. But the beautiful thing about the next generation of African thinkers is that we have completely outgrown the old psychological traps. Yes, we have. We can support a coordinated destabilization campaign from a mile away. The victory at the Constitutional Council is proof that when an authentic movement combines raw grassroots power with meticulous, uncompromised execution of the law, the establishment becomes completely powerless. The Legislative House of Senegal is no longer a playground for colonial administrators. It is a fortress of national self-determination, and the people are standing guard at the gates. What we are witnessing in Dakar is part of a massive sweeping historical tide that cannot be contained by any court filing or external intervention. This isn't just about one single politician or a specific seat in the building. This is about the complete redefinition of what it means to possess collective autonomy on this continent. For generations, our political landscape was dominated by leaders who were entirely fluent in the language of Western diplomacy, but completely illiterate when it came to the actual demands of their own citizens. They were comfortably running states that were independent on paper, while their economic resources, their currencies, and their legal frameworks were entirely managed by overseas boardrooms. So, the PASTEF phenomenon has completely shattered that old paradigm. When Ousmane Sonko stands on that legislative floor as President of the National Assembly, he represents a clean break from decades of institutional submission. He represents a generation that refuses to ask for permission to control its own destiny. The old guard can scream. They can stage their dramatic boycotts. They can run to their international handlers to beg for support. But the structural shift has already occurred. The people have tasted true political agency, and they are never going to hand the keys back to the puppet masters. The victory achieved recently is just one single checkpoint in a long, uncompromising march towards absolute structural ownership. So, the architecture of dependence is being systematically dismantled piece by piece, and no amount of legal sabotage is going to stop this train from reaching its final destination. So, the legal traps are breaking in real time. The foundational pillars of absolute national self-determination and being aggressively secured on this legislative floor, and our analytical focus must remain entirely ironclad. We are no longer a generation that will quietly watch from the sidelines while corrupt establishment networks attempt to use administrative sabotage to decapacitate our most brilliant transformative leaders. I'm your host Marie. This is Power and Pulse, and I will see you all in the very next deep dive.